what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This is
RedPubPod.
Wow. That's a very NPR-ish RedPubPod. A podcast from Red Hawk Publications. RedPubPod.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this next edition of RedPubPod, your friendly podcast from Red Hawk Publications, an initiative of Catawba Valley Community College in lovely, charming Hickory, North Carolina. How'd I do on that one, Richard?
You did great. Yeah. You sounded almost like Robert, but not
I know,
quite.
I try so hard. You know, the plush welded studios.
Yeah.
We miss Robert. And by the way, if you're out there, all 10 of our listeners, please know he will be back.
And he's on the mend.
And he is. Today, we're very, very fortunate to have with us a special author whose book we've published, Christopher Nelson. We know him as Chris. The book that we put out most recently that he has published is Where You Are From, of course, available at our website, redhawkpublications.com. Boy, I'm getting that plug in real early.
Yeah.
It's never too early. Never too early.
Chris, welcome, and thank you for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
I've got some initial questions. I'm going to ask you to do your bio because it's a little constraining just to read what's on the back of the book, although anyone is welcome to read that. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about where you're from, Chris Nelson's origin story.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I grew up between Kings Creek and Lenoir, North Carolina, some in the hills north of town in Mulberry. I've lived many lives since leaving Lenoir at 18. Been a college student, short order cook. I lived in a ditch for a while. I've been a paralegal. I taught university for 7 years. And, I was a door guy at a bar. All those are true.
Wow. Okay, guy at the bar. I used to bribe you. Okay. Did you used to work at Catawba Valley Community College, or did you?
I have taught here, yes.
You did?
Yes, I taught in the CCP program while I was at HCAM. I taught a few cohorts and really enjoyed my time doing that.
Great.
And your subject was?
Oh, English.
Okay.
Yeah. I taught American literature and, of course, the good old 111 and 112 for those familiar with
That everybody takes.
the North Carolina
Intro.
the North Carolina course sequencing.
Intro.
That's what. Yeah, well, it's what makes everybody. I mean, that's what the podcast listeners want to hear about is the North Carolina.
Well,
Of course they do.
111.
Yes.
Let's talk about 111.
Yeah, just go ahead and look that up on the website. Chris, tell us a little bit about your educational background so folks know that you are steeped in literature and English writing.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I went to college, though, as a classical trumpetist. I grew up in Lenoir. Lenoir's got a long musical history. And sometime around sophomore year, I wasn't, one of the Lower Creek set. So I never thought about college until I got to be about a sophomore in high school. I started to have the realization that I didn't want to stay in Lenoir and work in the factories my entire life. And I felt some guilt about that. And for a while I thought, I'll be a paralegal. Ironically enough, I later did do that. I went to college to Appalachian State as a classical trumpeter, and I had a girlfriend in Lenoir, and the practice schedule that was required to play the trumpet and be successful and maintain a relationship in Lenoir did not work out. So, of course, like all young men, I chose the woman. And I became briefly a history major. I still love history. I mean, it is my minor. And when I was at the university, I spent most of my time hanging out with history professors. But I wrote a piece, a bit of creative nonfiction for I was in a first-year seminar for first-generation college students. And I wrote about an experience that had happened. And the professor was like, have you thought about being an English major? Have you thought about writing? And so I took a creative writing course, and I was hooked. I became an English major, and I'd always been a voracious reader, and I just threw myself into it.
So all those roads led to here.
Lord help us.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you talk about the musical history of Caldwell County being pretty famous, I take it you're talking about Captain Harper and the band and all that. Tell us how that affected you.
Well, I mean, this is a very Lenoir thing because it like a lot of things in Lenoir, you felt like you were growing up among ghosts. The building, the band building, the old Lenoir High band building was, I mean, it's a high school built a 3-story building just for its band. You know, it's got on the frieze above the front door of the band building, you've got the band's logo, you know, in cement and concrete, beautiful. And it was abandoned. It was boarded up. I can remember driving by with my father and seeing glow inside at night, and my dad telling me, well, those are the fires of, you know, the squatters. And so you're aware that there was this beautiful grand thing in the college up on the hill, the abandoned college up on the hill. You're aware that there are these grand things that were once around, but they are not there anymore. And people take pride in them, but they're also kind of ashamed of them. And my dad was in the Lenoir High School band. He was a percussionist just after Captain Harper retired, and he was under George Kirsten. I'm forgetting the band name. I actually got to know this man too when I was a teenager, and so my dad would talk about the Lenoir High School band and Lenoir High, but Lenoir High was abandoned, and you know, so there was a disconnect. There was this past that you knew was grander, more beautiful than what you saw,
than the present reality,
than what you saw growing up. But it was fascinating, and I never thought that was unique to Lenoir. I just thought, you know, the world.
Every town's got that.
Yeah, I mean, what town doesn't have a bunch of abandoned stuff? Like who doesn't? You know. Well, I mean, it's one of those funny things. It's an anecdote I tell a lot. When I first started teaching when I was in grad school, I was teaching a creative writing seminar, you know, for NC State, and you know, I was telling this kid, and we were having this conversation in office hours, and I was telling him about how like a walk I'd taken with my grandfather one time, and you know, not the only time it ever happened, but my grandfather, you know, pointed out like a crack pipe. And there were crack pipes on the ground and stuff. And my grandfather pointed one out. He's like, I don't ever want to see you touching one of those. And this kid, you know, was like, oh man, that's real. That's raw, man. Your grandfather was worried about addiction and all that. I was like, addiction? He didn't want me to get hepatitis.
Oh, I read that in your book.
Oh, that is in my book. Oh, that's in where you are. That's in the last story. That's in where you're from. That's a true story.
I have to tell you, everything he's talking about, Lenoir and Caldwell County, I'm fascinated because it resonates. It's in this book.
No, the book is where I'm from.
The book is
yeah, you correctly titled it.
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone out there who has been listening so far and has read the short story collection where you are from, none of this comes as a surprise. And if you haven't read the book, the collection of short stories, I should say, please do so, because everything he's saying right here, it's really putting into place what I've read. So thank you.
Huh?
So are those the only ghosts of Lenoir that are in the book?
No. There's so many more. And there are even more in the novel I'm working on. No, there are all kinds of ghosts of Lenoir. You've got the elements of the good old boy. You've got the good old small town corruption, but not like Dukes of Hazzard, but how it actually tends to work.
Oh, not the comic version.
Yeah,
a little more gritty.
Lord, I wish we had Boss Hogg. Boss Hogg came and spoke to my middle school, and that was the biggest. Oh, I loved that.
But didn't he live in this area? The actor that was Boss Hogg, didn't he live in Alexander County?
Well, James Best did. I don't think he was Boss Hogg in the show, but
sorry.
he was Roscoe Coltrane, I think it was. Yeah.
Well,
the sheriff.
This was Boss Hogg. He even came out in his. He even came out in a white suit.
Oh yeah.
But and I didn't know this, but he was Papa Smurf.
Oh really?
He did the voice of Papa Smurf, or at least that's what he told us middle schoolers at William Lenoir back in 1990. too.
Okay. But the creative nonfiction class, that was really the genesis of this book, right?
Yeah, it was actually just a first-year seminar, but I wrote and the incident I wrote about there is not in this collection at all. It does play a factor in the novel. But yeah, I wrote a non-fictional piece about a childhood experience, and it struck her, the professor, Dr. Lynn Moss Sanders. Much respect to her.
Well, I have to share, not only do I have a sense of place and a sense of who you are by reading these short stories, but it does beg the question, when you write this novel that I know that you are writing, is it a springboard from one of these short stories, or is it something completely different?
Completely different.
Okay.
Some of the characters, I mean, you'll see some of the characters, but this tells the story of a family that aren't in these pages.
Okay. Oh, that's good, because you got a lot of different kind of stories and families, so it's good. I have to tell you, I learned so much from this job, and I have learned over the years so much from Robert as I read, to be not just a reader for enjoyment, but to try to look at things a little differently. What I did notice is just the change of the voice. You know, you've got some first person, you've got third person, and here was my big question that I actually had to go and research. Your very last short story, which is entitled Where You Are From, is that fourth person or second?
Second.
It's second? Okay, yeah, see, man, I was trying to figure out. It's either second or fourth.
Second. I actually once had an editor. I once had an editor of a very nice, reputable journal write me a personalized rejection that meant a lot in a lot of ways. It was earlier in my career, and I sent him an earlier version of that story. And he was full of compliments about my writing until the very end. But the last sentence was, "But you use second person," and I fucking hate second person.
But you know what, though? The interesting thing is, and again, this is something I've learned through different pods that we've done and from Robert, doing second and fourth, they are the most challenging to do because you're putting us in the driver's seat. And so you have to be able to really nail it and do it well, which, here's the interesting thing. By the time you read all the other short stories, man, that last short story in second person, it just puts everything together. It just makes sense. And I want to thank you for that, because as I was rereading them, I had read this a long time ago as a beta reader, and all of our beta readers loved your book, by the way.
And I love all your beta readers.
Yeah.
A lot of love in this room.
When I reread it this weekend, I was in touch with Robert, and I'm like, "Yo, what is this?" I'm like, every single short story falls at the ending of it. It breaks my heart. You know, there's a lot of for lack of a better term, foreboding. It's like, it's so sad because I know what's going to happen to these people. You don't have to tell me. You set me up. It's like, oh, this is kind of tragic, but I see this, and it's so well written. The characters are so developed, and you create a little world in 11 pages. It's like, how does he do this? You're one of our top tier writers, Chris, and
thank you. Wow.
That's not just hyperbole. It's like the fact is, these are incredibly well written short stories. They are hard to do. So by the time you get to that last story, now I understand why you brought me through all of that, you know.
I'll be completely honest. That story, it's one of those rare instances of just something, muse. I hate to bring up a muse, but like, I remember the genesis of that story. I was thinking about the collection kind of in its totality, and it wasn't even a direct thought. It was just the first line of that story hit me. When you were a child, no more than 10, 2 buildings burned down on Main Street within sight of City Hall. And something about that just really encapsulated something about growing up in Lenoir. I mean, because it had enough distance. I mean, I could have gone with another true thing, when you were in second grade, your elementary school burnt down, and then 2 weeks later, they made you kids go back in there. Also true, East Harper Elementary burning in 1988, I believe it was.
Wow.
And 2 weeks later, they put us right back in the unburnt portion of it to finish out the school year.
Lenoir.
Lenoir itself is, it's one of the most fascinating places I've ever experienced. And I've lived many lives in, not all across the country, but definitely in various locations in the state and one very prominent location in the Midwest. And I've never, ever, ever experienced anything like Lenoir.
So you grew up steeped in all the things going on around you and made a lot of connections with that stuff.
Oh, very much so.
But I will say your family is famous because you are half the name of one of the towns in Caldwell County, right?
Well, that is actually the branch that made good.
Okay.
For temporarily.
All right.
They were, that branch, good Lord, I don't even remember exactly which. They branched off, that was my great-great-granddad's brother's line.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
mistaken.
Okay.
Who did, yes, the Nelson plants in Whitnall, the White and Nelson family, that made good. My direct line, Nelson's Chapel Baptist Church.
Okay.
That was founded by my 4 or 5 back grandfather.
Wow.
And that is still the old burying ground. That's where, right up until my grandparents' generation, that's where we put our dead. Oh, no, great-grandparents. My great-granddad and great-grandmother are in Bellevue. But prior to that, all the family graves are still up there in that little valley around, a little holler around Pigeon Creek.
Yeah, and the Bellevue one is the big city one, north, slightly north of town, northeast of town.
If anyone's familiar with Hickory, Bellevue is Lenoir's version of Oakwood.
Right, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Steeped in dead tradition.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, it's funny, some of the sayings, Granny's sayings, coming up. And then one of them, I think, has made its way into this collection. How can you say you're from somewhere if you ain't planted nothing there? And Granny meant bodies. She meant if you've not planted, you're dead there.
Oh, not a corn stalk.
No, we're not.
Not just farming.
No, we're not talking about how can you say if you're from there unless you put people in the ground?
Wow.
She also used to say if you can't see high bright and you've gone too far.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, that's funny. There are so many unique mentions in the book, and it's a local book when someone somewhere mentions "Don't put me in Broughton," and of course that's mentioned in the book. Mm-hmm. And for those that are familiar with the area, Broughton is a very well-known
state mental hospital. Mm-hmm. Yes,
and it was a threat that people in Catawba County got too. So
yeah.
Oh yeah, we got that threat.
Yeah.
Oh, my parents would joke about taking you across the tracks. I mean, that was their euphemism for Broughton.
I actually, growing up, knew a few people that spent a few weeks in Broughton.
Mm, yeah.
So.
It was not just an idle threat. It did actually happen to a few people. Not me, though.
There are
not yet, right?
Give it time.
It's still around.
Give it time. Give it time.
Oh, that'd be a full circle thing, wouldn't it?
Never say never, Richard.
Right.
I learned that. I once said I would never live in the Midwest.
And you did.
Oh, Lord. See, never is the quickest way there.
I noticed in the book that you use euphemisms like you're not using Kings Creek, which you mentioned, mm-hmm. but in your book it's Lord Creek.
Lord's Creek.
And there's a town called Rhine. Which is...
Hickory.
I thought so. Okay,
mm-hmm.
good for me.
Rhine is Hickory, yeah.
Rhine is Hickory.
Yeah, taken from the second half of Hickory's local college.
Lenoir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for local folks that live in the Foothills area, you'll have fun kind of reading through the book, and it tracks. It just makes sense. The other thing that was kind of interesting to read, and of course you're from there. That's where you were from. You've got the intergenerationals going on.
Yes.
You've got the perspective of a young person, a perspective of an older person, a perspective of a female. You've got grandparents playing prominent roles.
Yes.
You bring in immigrants. When the factories close down and everybody's hopeful that the jobs might come back from China, meanwhile, immigrants are coming in and you're grateful for them. I mean, you really do paint a portrait of what has happened in our area, not just Lenoir, but it's a good read, and it's kind of a sad read, but we also know going forward, things continue to change. Guess what? Some of the furniture did come back, not all of it, But, I mean, you do paint a very raw picture of what's going on in the foothills.
But I also think because we persevere, there is still hope. I do think that there is opportunity for redemption. One reviewer highly, I'm going to do a plug for a friend writer, Donald Seacrest, another Lenoir writer. He reviewed the book, and he said that my characters all had, I forget the term he used, something epiphanies, where they have the realization that a better life is possible, but that they probably won't get there. I don't disagree, but I don't necessarily all the way agree, because I do think there's room for hope in persistence. It honestly, it makes me think of, and this goes back kind of full circle into writing itself. The best advice I ever got writing comes from another plug, Joseph Bethany. And he told me, like, a long time ago when I was young, he said, "Chris, do you know the difference between a writer and a failed writer?" And I said, "No." And he said, "The writer didn't quit. That's it." I mean, that was it. The writer didn't quit.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that with the people around this area, because there has been a lot of change, and a lot of change in a relatively short period of time. And when you have wider social or cultural changes happening in the midst of economic upheaval, it just creates all kinds of consequences. And for the human lives, I really wanted this collection to capture not just the arc of local history, but the human lives, because we don't live history, writ large. We live history subjectively through our own individual experiences. And our lives are still our lives. I mean, these characters, they may be struggling with the loss of income, or with, when I'm thinking about the protagonist in Strangers, all her husband, he'd worked really hard to, at the bank, all this had been going well, and then the subprime market collapsed, and he finds himself somewhat adrift. But that's not what these people are. That's not the primary concern of the people around them. The relationship with her son, the relationship, thinking of Carl Shook, the relationship with his wife, with his son, with his father, and that, that intergenerational, and also the narratives we tell ourselves, the truths we tell ourselves. Carl Shook is convinced that the factories will come back because that's what's natural. That's what, we always think the world that we're born into is somehow this fixed divine order of how things should be. But it's really just the first thing we've experienced, and we just don't know any better. And so he's struggling with all of this. And I definitely don't think he necessarily has that kind of epiphany. I think I've always thought he more cursed his son, but anyway.
Well, you know what? That's one of those situations where we see what we want to see.
Yes.
He had a glimmer of hope, and it was probably very misplaced, but for him, that place is going to reopen. Now, and again, don't want to give too many spoilers out there. You got to get this book where you are from at redhawkpublications.com. But one of the short stories talks about real estate development. What does the grandson do with land that, it's been steeped in your family for X generations, and now you owe money, the note's due, and you get a real estate guy coming up and saying, we could put some vacation homes for people from Florida, something's no longer manufacturing in Lenoir or Caldwell. That seems to be what folks are doing, selling out the family land and going for the money. And what does the kid do? Well, I know what he does. That's the end of that story. I like that story because that gave me hope. This kid was going to sell that property. Right?
Maybe.
Maybe? Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know.
But it is a struggle. I mean, the tradition versus change.
Oh, absolutely.
That you just don't see in Lenoir, although Lenoir's got a lot of opportunities for that to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And at that time, northern Caldwell County was being bought up.
Being groomed to be vacation land.
Oh, yeah. And you can still, there are still places where you can see where they've graded the cul-de-sacs, but that's just as far as they got.
Right.
They graded some cul-de-sacs up in the holler, but then the market collapsed. But there were definitely those kind of speculators going around. I remember encountering them when I worked at a bookstore in Boone. They would come around asking where the new cheap land was outside of Watauga County, where
And it's up in Blackberry and all those.
And I would try my best to steer them far away from there.
It's called Burke County.
I would say Tennessee.
Tennessee. There you go.
I tried to send them to Johnson County, Tennessee.
Thank you. By the way,
I'd be like, have you not seen how beautiful Lake Watauga is?
good call. Robert and I, like I say, we were kind of texting back and forth, and he calls your stories postmodern naturalism.
I will accept it. Yeah, I'll absolutely take it.
I think it's a very sociological perspective you bring into this whole thing.
I can't disagree with that. And it is, very rooted in place.
Yeah.
I think we often, especially in our, 21st century nomad land, and even I'm talking about like places I've lived here and there and everywhere, but we form these relationships with not only where we're from, but also wherever we live at the time. We get these sources of civic pride if we live in a city. We construct meaning and identity from our relationships to place. And I really think that there's a lot of fertile ground there in literature to explore, even in a postmodern and fragmented world.
Yeah, because hometown is a dicey word for a lot of people, because I just was reading another book about popular music in North Carolina, and people would refer to coming to a place and then calling that their hometown. And for a traditional point of view, that doesn't really work, because it's all about where you grew up.
Well, like we talked about, where your people buried.
Yeah.
And so there's that as well. And I'll say that I always, growing up, and no offense to those that have, but growing up, and it's something that I've talked about with other people from Lenoir. But yeah, a lot of people from Lenoir don't claim Lenoir as their hometown when they make good out there. And I've always stuck in my craw. Whenever I would see someone that I knew was from Lenoir, Caldwell County on TV, and it would say Hickory, I'd be like, "You ain't from Hickory."
I'm sorry, that's hysterical.
Yeah, I'd be like, "You ain't from Hickory. You went to West Caldwell."
Right.
I know. No. No.
By the way, Richard, didn't you spend some time in Lenoir?
Partially, yes,
Okay.
grew up there. But the first time I was out of town, moved to another place, and I was renting an apartment, a woman said, "Who are your people?"
Oh yeah.
And I'd never come across anybody asking me that before, and I
Really?
didn't have an available answer, but I had to make it up, as I went.
I'm like, really? I'm surprised you've never had that experience, because growing up in Lenoir, who are your people is like one of those.
But what does that mean from someone I'm from the Northeast?
Oh.
What are they asking?
Well, the easy entry is tell me your family name, so if there's somebody I know that we've got a connection.
Okay.
That's round one. But round two is I want to know if your people are prominent or not. You know, a little more inquisitive, getting in there to see how I need to treat you. Do I treat you as an equal? Do I treat you as one of my social betters, or do I treat you as one of my social inferiors? That question has
It's
all
loaded.
of that in there.
It's
yeah.
loaded.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it can even have, like, does this family traditionally get along with my family? Like, so how guarded do I need to be with this person?
Right. Are you a Hatfield and I'm a McCoy?
Yeah, I mean, well, not obviously, not. I mean, maybe
Not to that level, but yeah.
maybe not obviously not to that level, but I mean, not to that level, but yeah, I mean, there is that because for me, it was always, you know, I mean, who are your people? I'm Turner Nelson's grandson. In Lenoir, that was my answer. I'm Turner Nelson's grandson.
That's your calling card.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
And Grandpa was. We never had money, but Grandpa was well known. He was known for, and I still don't know exactly like what he did, but like Grandpa was like loved in Lenoir's black community. Like I can't tell you how many cookouts I've been in. Like I've been able to get in on because I was Turner's boy, and that's what I was known. I was like, that's Turner's boy. But who's your people's big. And I can still remember I took, back in grad school, I took some friends of mine, also a writer who he will make his name, Eric Rowe, pen that name. But I took he and his wife and my ex-wife, and we went up to the old burying ground in Mulberry by Nelson's Chapel. And I took him up there because, I mean, he'd never been in the hills, you know. He was from Toledo, of all places. And we're walking up the driveway to the little track to the burying ground, and there was a groundsman had been doing work up there, and he was coming down the hill. And boy howdy, he fixed us quick with a look. And you know, first thing we walked up, he said, "Who's your people?" You know, easy peasy. I said, "Well, I'm a Nelson," and he got up in my face and he looked at me a minute. And if there's one thing, my branch of Nelsons, we all look alike. We have very strong genes. For good or ill. But he looked at me and he went, "Oh yeah, you're a Nelson." That was it. That was it. Wow. You know, shook hands, said, "How you doing?" Said, going to show him up the old burying ground. He was like, "Oh, I just mowed up there." Told us what work he'd done up there, and and that was it. That was the It's
old home week after that.
Well, hey, but you got to have the bona fides. I mean,
true.
You don't just wander in, without the bona fides.
Well, having lived here just for 17 years, can't believe I'm saying that. Every once in a while, Steve, my husband, will mention a prominent last name. Oh, there are Hoods from Mountain View. There are Hoods from Caldwell. And I'm like, oh, just like there are Shooks from Catawba County. He's like, yes. So there's last names. People kind of associate things with them. So I now I understand what you're saying. And every time someone asks me, I'm a Thompson from here. No, I'm a Thompson from Brooklyn. Sorry. Folks don't understand. I'm not from the local Thompsons. I get it. Chris, real quick, I'm going to ask you to read something.
Absolutely.
And as you prep for the reading, I do want to ask an important question. How are your local folks in Lenoir, Caldwell County receiving your book? Those that have read it.
So far, I think pretty well. I've not received any complaints. A lot of people are really curious. They like to, as you mentioned earlier, be like, "Oh, this place is that, isn't it?" And me, yes, yeah, that's, or no, it's actually over here. Things of that nature. A lot of people have enjoyed seeing familiar things, familiar places. And I've gotten a few questions about like, "Oh, so-and-so, was that anything to do with this person or this incident?" And honestly, I tell them the truth, which is maybe a little bit, but it's not like a direct, I'm drawing, from this, I'm trying to, it's fiction. I mean,
it's not straight reportage at that point.
Yes, it's very much fiction. It's very much fiction. That's why in the acknowledgments, it does say if you think you see yourself in this collection, you don't. You don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are you going to read for us?
I'm actually going to read from. Sorry, I got to put on my reading glasses. I'm going to read from What He Knows. This is the story with Carl Shook. He has. Well, you'll see. I'm going to read the introduction, and and you'll see. Dad, Dad. Carl Shook listens to his son's voice echo across the empty parking lot, off the tall brick wall and back again, hollow. The large rusty sign is still attached to the top of the wall, at least 50 feet off the ground in large block letters. Hilldale Assembly, number 7. Carl doesn't respond. It takes all his energy to keep his hold on the chain-link fence separating the lot from the old plant. His fingers show the ragged cross stitches earned inside that building from years handling rough wood, sanding each piece down until it was smooth enough for final assembly, the life he'd been prepared for. Behind him, the traffic flowing by on West Side Highway sounds like wind you hear coming but hasn't reached you yet. Didn't you hear me? Doug appears at his father's side. He's unnaturally tall for his age. He hit his first growth spurt early in 4th grade, and 2 years later he's just a foot or so shorter than Carl's 6 feet. Carl wishes Doug would try basketball again. He'd be sure to make the middle school's team next year if he practiced, but the boy says he doesn't want to. I heard you. Mom wants to know what you're doing out here. What are you doing here? Carl asked. Why aren't you in school? I had a doctor's appointment and we were driving home and saw your truck. The boy keeps talking, spilling inane details about the appointment in school, something about stopping at McDonald's. Kurt nods, keeping his eyes focused on the wall. He'd forgotten about Doug's checkup. Everything go okay? He asks, interrupting. I guess. Carl nods again. Another $100 or so spent and the boy's healthy. He told Karen to take him to the health department. She, of course, had wanted Carl to take Doug to the doctor, but he'd refused. That kind of stuff was for a mother. Work was for a father. That's how it had always been at his house growing up. It's the way things had always been. Carl doesn't move, and after a minute, Doug turns and walks back to the waiting car. Carl listens as the engine cranks and the sound of crunching gravel fades into the white noise of the highway. The house is too loud when Carl gets home. Dishes are being knocked together in the kitchen sink, and something sounding like Hell's Orchestra blares from the living room. Maybe it's always been this loud, he thinks. While the sanding floor wasn't as loud as the rough room where the wood transformed from solid blocks to recognizable parts of tables and dressers, the whir and the hiss of the sanders linger like the memory of a childhood blanket. He pokes his head in the living room on his way to the kitchen. Doug sits on the couch staring at a cartoon with the volume turned up, his Game Boy on his lap. Carl watches for a few seconds, but he can't understand cartoons anymore. He was raised on Looney Tunes and then only on Saturday mornings, not this epileptic stuff full of vaguely Asian characters with funny voices and more flashing lights and sounds than a pinball machine. Just looking gives him a headache. Finish your homework? Doug startles at the sound of his voice. I will after the show, he says, before returning back to the TV. You can watch TV after you finish your homework, he says, stepping between his son and the television. Doug's shoulders fall and he slides down the couch so he can still see the TV. Rather than play the game of moving around to keep himself in Doug's way, Carl snaps, "Boy," and Doug stares down into his lap, examining the tiny blank screen in his hand. Okay, Doug says. What was that? Carl leans forward, cupping his ear. Yes, sir. Carl straightens and forces a smile. As Doug passes, he reaches out and takes the Game Boy. Just until you can show me your finished homework, he says. Doug skulks to his room and Carl flips the TV off on his way to the kitchen. He sits at the table, turning the Game Boy over in his hands. So small and fragile. He can't see what the attraction is. A gizmo probably put together halfway around the world and not even put together well. Carl twists it in his hands until it bends perceptibly, just a fraction of an inch. He sets it down, afraid he'll wind up breaking something if he's not careful. What do kids see in these things? He asks his wife, who stands at the sink. Karen turns slowly, her shoulders stiff. I heard you in there with Doug, she says, focusing on the dish rag in her hands. I told him he could watch that one show. I thought we'd agreed he couldn't watch TV until his homework was done. She stops twisting the rag and stares hard at him. No, you decided that. I never said anything of the sort. You can't keep undermining me, Carl. Her arms fall to her sides, but her eyes remain firm. Carl stares at the table, then picks the Game Boy back up and immediately sets it down again. I need a shower, he says, ignoring the look Karen gives him as he leaves.
You create quite a world with very, very memorable characters. I mean, you can just see where Carl's coming from. It starts at a closed manufacturing plant, so we know where this is heading. It's a man that doesn't understand where he is in time.
Well, it captures the interplay between the generations, which is always going on. For us as kids, for us as oldsters, it's all in there.
Yeah, and I didn't mean it at the time, but now I cannot help but see Carl Shook in the same light as something like Hank Hill from King of the Hill. And I didn't think of it at the time, but now just that with that kind of like Bobby.
Yeah.
And kind of like Doug.
What is this anime?
and interesting, and he does. He even later he mispronounces anime and later in the story. And also interestingly enough, this is the story where I worked both my parents' first names in.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
My mother is Karen and my father was Doug.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, you can't help but understand, it from with your own experience, seeing it from kind of all of their perspectives of how that dysfunction ends up going on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe not in my family, but I saw it enough.
It's out there. Yeah.
Around.
You know what? We have to start to wrap this up, but the most important thing for folks to know is you've heard Chris do a reading. It's an amazing collection of short stories. We have many copies here, and as a matter of fact, before Chris leaves, he's going to be signing some. So if you order them at our website, you'll be able to get a signed copy. And don't we have something going on June 10th?
We also have an event coming up we need to plug there,
Yeah.
Patty. You and I believe Rhonda Browning-White are going to be appearing at the Lincoln Cultural Center next Tuesday, June 10th at 7?
I believe it is 7 o'clock, but
That's
all
7
the
p.m.
information is going to be on the description of this pod, as well as our Facebook account and Instagram. So, yeah, I think it is at 7.
Yes, at 7, and be looking for advertisements on the Facebook and social medias, and all the good social medias. I'm also on Blue Sky at NelsonCL80. I'm on Facebook at NelsonCL80.
And you're also on Instagram, right?
I am on
Yeah,
Instagram.
okay.
Also NelsonCL80.
Okay.
I promise to post more pictures. I'm trying. I promise.
And the other thing, too, is we'll put all of your little handles on our description of this pod, so
Yes.
folks will be able to find you and
Absolutely.
follow you.
Give me a follow. I'm always happy to hear from anyone. If you can even write me just to yell at me. That's fine.
I think, finally, just to let folks know that this is a wonderful book that you would actually enjoy reading at Tasteful Beans, which happens,
Our sponsor.
our proud sponsor of this podcast today. So again, please make sure you check out Scott Owens and his lovely collection of books and wonderful coffee at Tasteful Beans in downtown Hickory. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, staff at Tasteful Beans, for keeping us highly energetic. And I think at the end, we can kind of wrap this up. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you guys for
Appreciate it.
having me so much. It's always fun to be here at the Red Hawk offices.
We always appreciate folks following, sharing, and liking us on our different social media accounts, including Facebook and Instagram, and even TikTok, even though we're not supposed to be. Haha. And that said, we're almost done. We just have one thing left to do. Chris, would you mind just helping us out? Say, RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
Wow.
A man that has
That's
listened
a very
to this before.
NPR-ish RedPubPod.
I've told you that I'm putting on my radio voice.
Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Patty. Thanks so much.
Thank you. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. This is
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
Wow, a podcast from Red Hawk Publications.
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. I've told you I'm putting on my radio voice.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.